Welcome guys, gals and non-binary pals to this week's episode of Buffy Boys, your weekly review of Buffy the Vampire Slayer from a queer, literary and feminist perspective. My name is Joel, one of your hosts, and with me as always is your other frosty host.
Brian, how's it going?
I really slid into that one. I thought I was going to lose my footing on that particular intro.
Yeah, I could hear that. But you didn't. You did great, and I'm proud of you, Joel.
Thank you. There's a man outside the window right now taking a lot of photos of a parked car, and I don't know who is suspicious. Is it the car or the man?
I don't know either. It's a weird one.
So welcome to Buffy Boys. We're here to talk about season 7 episode 17 of Buffy Lies My Parents Told Me.
Yeah, actually, just a very brief side thing into that. We live in a very nice street. It's the community is very lovely. There's a WhatsApp group. Everyone's very chatty. Someone has designed Christmas cards for the avenue, which is very nice, and we're gonna go pick some up. But about a month ago, someone was like, so listen guys, I know the parking situation is difficult, which we don't know, we don't drive, because we're gay. And someone said, like, I know the parking situation is difficult, but I don't think it's appropriate to leave notes like this on cars. And it was just a note that said, fuck off, and not off, O-F. And I find that deeply, deeply funny. Yeah,
it was a real escalation from potentially nothing. Yeah.
It was wonderful. We also, I think an important context here also is that we are sitting in Santa's grotto, basically. We've done up our house for Christmas.
We winterized.
Yeah, we put on the winter tires on the house. We went shopping on Saturday just to pick up some Christmas ornaments. We got everything half price because it's kind of running up, it's kind of a bit close to Christmas now. I think people who like buying ornaments maybe buy them well in advance. But we were thrilled.
Yeah, we love a bargain.
We do love a bargain. And the place is looking very nice. We have fairy lights up. And we're all very lucky because when Ludo got here, we gave him a toy that was like a squeaky Triceratops chew toy. And he ignored it the entire time until 20 minutes ago when he picked it up and decided now was the time to start chewing on it, and it's squeaking all the time. And he's just stopped right before we started recording. So a blessed day.
He's also been any Christmas decoration that is anyway a soft furnishing or just low to the ground. He is being snatching and collecting, including like large wooden objects that I wouldn't have thought were collectible.
Yeah, what's really cute though is that he doesn't bring it to. He brings us to his bed. He does not want to chew it. He doesn't want to chew these things. He wants to bring them to have them. He just collects them and owns them. Then and he's like, these are mine now. Okay. Here is your Buffy Ann summary. This episode was first aired on March 25th, 2003. That's notable, and we'll get back to that in a second. It was directed by David Fury, who last directed Gone. This is the final episode he writes or directs, and it was written by David Fury as well, who last wrote Showtime with... and it was written by Drew Goddard as well. So it was directed by David Fury, and it was written by David Fury and Drew Goddard. And Drew Goddard last wrote Never Leave Me. And here is your Buffy Ann summary, which I already said, but here it actually is this time, I promise.
Buffy Ann Wintry.
Ooh. 1970s. Young Wood sees Spike fight his mother. Giles tries magically to clear Spike's mind of the first trigger. Wood persuades Giles that Spike is too great a risk, and Giles keeps Buffy busy. Wood triggers Spike, then beats him. Spike remembers. Okay. The trigger was his dying mother's song, Newly Vamped. He turned her and staked her when she rejected him. He beats Wood. Buffy is angry with Giles. Willow goes to LA. That's all accurate enough. So this episode was originally intended to air on March 18th, the day before Orpheus, the Angel episode. But it got delayed to the start because of the start of the Iraq War, which is,
inconvenient to say the least.
Yeah, it is. Okay, so Joel, for our bronze banter this week, let's sidle over to the bronze where we will talk about some stuff. So we've been watching stuff. We watched the Succession finale last night. I know this is not Succession suck-offs, but it was really good. Succession suckers.
Succession siblings.
No.
Succession sons.
Again, no.
It was good. Like we're not the only people who like Succession, but it was incredible. And
it was finale was so good.
Highly stressful.
Yeah.
And like I was saying to you earlier, I really enjoy it. I'm glad it's over so I can have a break because I can't live in the high stakes world.
No, it's too much. Additionally, we have watched quite a bit of Arcane over the last week. Arcane is the League of Legends TV show that's on Netflix now, which I mean, if someone told me that, I would not watch it, you know?
Yeah.
However, the relationship it has with League of Legends, the massively online battle arena game.
We're not even super clear what kind of game it is. No,
I think it's Battle
Arena
by Riot Games.
But yeah, it's a loose relationship with the actual game itself.
Yeah, and it's an animated TV show, visually stunning, really beautifully animated, very similar to, I mean, like very much in the line of Dragon Prince, or probably even more appropriately, Spider-Man into the Multiverse. What's it called?
Oh, you've scattered my brain now. It's not multiverse at all. It's
Enter the
Spider-Verse. Yeah,
Enter the Spider-Verse.
Into the Spider-Verse.
No, this new one is into the the new. Yeah, okay.
We know this film.
Spider-Verse. And it's visually great, but like it was an intriguing, unusual steampunk setting, and we were like, oh, this is interesting, and the characters seem pretty good. But like it wasn't quite clicking with me. And then episode 3, there's like just a massive paradigm shift throughout the whole thing, where everything kind of falls apart, and it's a jump from that point to the rest of the show, which I think is actually very like, you know, unusual and brave and interesting and intriguing. And it was just really good.
It is just a far better show than a video game adaptation.
It's probably the best video game adaptation of all time so far.
Yeah, let alone League of Legends has any right to be. And also, very Art Nouveau kind of inspired style. Like, it's really well shot. It's animated, but like well.
No, the individual shots are composed very well. Yeah.
And as I always like to warn people early on, if I can, it is queer. So which was an unexpected boom.
They're queer boys in it? No,
I don't know. I haven't finished it yet, Brian.
There are never queer boys in anything. Which, you know, the issue there is that, of course, that like, you know, queer.
You hate women. I know. We've discussed it on the podcast before.
There's a lot more representation of queer women in video games and animated series because the people making it, queer women are much more are seen as being much more acceptable to them, and that is not a knock against queer women. Queer women deserve every ounce of representation they get, and far, far more. But also queer men should have far more representation in those fields. Yeah, no,
it's a historic expression of, again, kind of patriarchy and male dominance, in the sense that there was laws against male homosexuality, and there was no laws or statements or existence so that women could have sex, essentially. Yeah. And so it's all basically male centric in both a positive and a constructive and an unconstructive way. Yeah. So yeah, lack of that, but Arcane, good show. Fun, and kind of like interesting YA kind of adventure kind of vibe to it. Yeah.
But like, you know, 16 plus YA.
Yeah, there's some violence, there's some swearing.
Some violence. No nudity, no sex.
Appropriate, because almost everyone in it is like, for most of it, is like young.
Yeah, true. It's just like a very visually pleasing world, and very like constructed. You know, every visual element seems intentional. There's a little bit of grim darkness to it, which, you know, can get a bit like, you know, annoying at times, just a tiny bit, but I'm very sensitive to the grim darkness. But it's very good. I definitely recommend it. And then otherwise we also watched quite a bit of Freaks and Geeks, which you've watched, you think, around 4 episodes of before, right?
Yeah,
with me at some point.
I think I've watched the first 4 episodes with you a couple of times now, but I am confident that we've gotten a good. I think it's happening sometimes. You get a good run at a TV show. It only has 17 episodes.
17 episodes.
Yeah,
it was 2000. Judd Apatow TV show. He has said that everything he has done since then, in terms of every movie he's made, has been as revenge for Freaks and Geeks getting cancelled after 1 season. Which, Jesus Christ, please, just like A, Freaks and Geeks is amazing, and B, everything else Judd Apatow does is kind of insufferable for the most part.
What would be some famous Judd Apatow properties if you weren't
sure? So Knocked Up, 40-Year-Old Virgin,
Superbad's Judd Apatow.
Superbad. Oh, I think Superbad's Judd Apatow. I believe so. Love, that TV show, which we actually quite liked.
Was that Judd Apatow? Right?
Yeah, it was. But you can tell it's a Judd Apatow show when an incredibly beautiful woman is pursued by a really incredibly like nothing looking man, and every single time he gets her for absolutely no reason, just beautiful women being incredibly attracted to not great looking men. There you go, that's a Judd Apatow show. But in this, like, you know, it's basically the originator for so many, or like the launching off points for so many careers. James Franco's in it, which, you know, James Franco, scum human by all accounts. But this is where he got to start. Linda Cardinelli is in it, he's currently in Hawkeye. She's his wife. And I can't remember her name actually in it, but we reckon
Laura.
We reckon she's going to be a big part of it. We'll see.
I really hope this guy is a contractor or something.
He looks like he's robbing the car.
He has just removed the car's windshield, so we could be witnessing a crime. She's in Hawkeye. Busy.
She was in Eeyore.
Eeyore, of course. Busy Phillips.
Yeah, who was in Cougar Town and was incredible in Cougar Town.
And we haven't said anything about what the show is about, but essentially it's
set in 1980, and it's high schoolers and just dealing with the trials and tribulations of being a high schooler. But it's also, like, I mean, there are it's kind of two halves. It's Linda Cardinelli, her character, and kind of the older teenagers who are the freaks, and then the geeks who are the younger kind of Bill Murray, Caddyshack referencing
Star Wars
geeks, who are kind of just fresh into high school,
wearing Coke bottle glasses and all that kind of
stuff.
Exactly,
and just kind of trying to figure out their way. It's incredibly touching. It's so good. I'm sure you already know Freaks and Geeks if you're a big Buffy fan, but it's so worth watching. Huge recommendation.
Yeah. So speaking of some freaks in high school.
Oh, I thought we were going to talk about your having finished the Buffy comics.
Oh yeah, sure. That's an easy.
You finished the Buffy comics, Joel?
Yeah, we can talk about that. Absolutely. I finished the Buffy comics, and when I say I finished the Buffy comics, what I mean is I've read every Buffy comic or Age comic that has ever been printed and produced. Which
a pretty impressive feat.
Yeah, which is overall like quite worthwhile. And I love seeing more of the gang, and I love kind of, you know, I love both the story aspect of that kind of stuff, but also I love production. I love, why was this published? Who owned this license? Why did they make these decisions and all that kind of stuff?
And if someone wants an inroad into this, where should they start?
Oh, great question. So I actually have probably two recommendations for that. One is that in 2016 there was 3 volumes of a graphic novel, each of which is about 80 pages published, and it's just called Buffy the High School Years. Quite polished, quite professionally produced. They're not really connected to any other continuity, except I would say they're set in the first 3 or 4 episodes of Buffy, basically, because Principal Flutie is still alive. And it's really fundamental high school library monster of the week, and
love it.
And really invigorates the formula.
And you end up quite enjoying the Dark Horse comics as well, which are the season 8, 9, and 10, 11, right? As in, like, you know, they're like, they had their moments of like awkwardness, but you ended up finding them actually very intriguing. Yeah, so
I'll come to Dark Horse in a second. My other recommendation for an inroad would actually be the 2019 reboot of Buffy, the comic.
Who's publishing that?
Boom Studios. Okay. Boom Studios have actually taken a lot of licensed work and done some pretty good adaptations. And licensed work is often terrible, you know, so that's kind of, I suppose, notable. But what they did is they took all the elements that we're familiar with from Buffy, set it as if she was in high school in 2019 and went from there. So say Willow is there, but she's already has a girlfriend because, you know, social mores have changed and all that kind of stuff. And then just remix certain things like Robin Wood is already there.
As a principal, or?
No, he's their age. Cool. But he's a trainee watcher. Faith and Kendra come along earlier for various reasons. Drusilla and Anya is already there. So everyone you already know is reinterpreting it.
There.
It's kind of reinterpreting the way that Hannibal reinterpreted Silence of the Lambs. But why I think it's a good jumping on point is obviously clean continuity. It's more modern in many ways. And they do some, I think, really interesting things. They make a real point to show a lot more diversity in the Slayer line, and obviously the cast. But also some surprising, like, people die and people get sired that you don't expect. That's always like, oh, shocking. But what's really gotten my teeth into it, so to speak, is the current arc. What they're building towards is placing these comics as in the same multiverse as the Buffy that we know, and kind of how it's related to that, but also really examining explicitly how the Watchers as a patriarchal organization have separated and subjugated the Slayers. Now, obviously, we talk about that in the show itself, but that conversation is older now, and we start from that point here. And really look at how the Slayers can liberate each other. So it's another
answer to the same problem.
Yeah, it's answering the same problem, except starting from the conversation we're already at in 2020. Yeah. So, and I've quite enjoyed it for that reasons. And yeah, the older Dark Horse stuff, which is kind of the canon continuation, season 8 to season 12, had its rough patches, for certain. Often, to be honest, when Joss's hand was kind of over egging it in terms of
season 8 seems to be his worst moment, where he is the most involved.
Yeah, and highly trying to turn it into a superhero property. But there's some stuff there in the middle. That's
Buffy learning to be a real person and stuff, right?
Yeah, basically Buffy, like, as the oldest surviving Slayer, like, what could it look like to have a life, and Dawn getting older and some stuff. That was just, if you like comic books, you like Buffy, it sounded like them. And I enjoyed it. And then just elsewhere in the canon, there's just, or in the kind of the comic world, there's like various year one stuff, what did Buffy do before she came to Sunnydale, and weird Angel comics I've read, and Angel after the fall of Los Angeles, and what happened to Lauren, because people leave that ambiguous because Andy Hallis actually died in real life. So there's a lot of weird, interesting stuff in there, but it is exciting. And my conclusion is it's exciting to have ongoing new Buffy content that's being produced, because I think it's in pretty good hands. So nice. It was a wonderful little journey.
Nice. And you specifically like the Faith and Angel stuff, where they're that all stuff. That's the stuff that sounded really intriguing to me, and I would like probably go off and read it.
Yeah, it's basically anywhere in there. There's comics where Giles and Faith are trying to find rogue Slayers after all the potentials are activated. There's some seasons where Angel and Faith are working together as a classic kind of detective duo, and they work very differently to how Buffy works with people and all that kind of stuff. So I think it just shows me there's a lot still to mine. Yeah, from the Buffy universe.
And as a quick note, the next week's episode is going to be the final one for the year. We'll do our traditional best of the year lists for ourselves. Which is, we'll keep it short though. Thankfully, next week's episode is not too crazy intense. Well, it is intense, but it's not like this is a dense episode this week. And then we'll be back, I'd say, around the 12th of January. So we'll be taking approximately 2 weeks off from the podcast, which I think is pretty reasonable. And then we'll be in the conclusion of the show, which is crazy. Okay, let's move
slouching towards the Hellmouth.
Yeah, exactly.
Lies my parents told me.
Yeah, Lies My Parents Told Me. How'd you feel about it, Joel?
I thought it was a really good episode.
Me too.
I was really intrigued by it.
What I liked about it is that it was really good without a gimmick. It was just writing good.
Yeah, 100%. I feel, like, framing aside, there's only like 2 scenes in it, or 2 or 3 scenes. It's really...
I found that as well. When I got to the end of the episode, I was like, nothing has happened, and I haven't felt bored in any sense, or nothing like not a huge amount has happened. I haven't felt bored for a moment, and now it's done because it was just so engaging moment to moment.
Yeah. So essentially, we have, Jaws is back in town. There's a certain rapid catching up where he's like, okay, who's Robin? Who's Spike? What's happening? All that kind of stuff. And we get ourselves into a position where Buffy's on one side with Spike and argument that he is not a risk, despite the trigger built into him. And
Despite the big trigger.
Despite it, yeah. And Robin and Giles, for their own reasons, thinking that it is not worth it to the cause to keep him alive. And through that, kind of going into his backstory, kind of getting into why it is a trigger for him, and his issues with his mother essentially have underpinned in a very explicit and textual way kind of everything that he's done, everything he's become, how those issues reflect on Buffy, how Robin's issues with his mother also reflect on Buffy, because she is in some senses kind of part of his mother as well, which is, and then ultimately the dissolution of her kind of parental bond with Giles as kind of a result of this. So very parent focused
for sure.
So my question watching it, I thought there was some great performances.
All four of the mains do a great job here.
Yeah, 100%. And some very interesting stuff. And my question I wanted to bring to you was, who was right in your opinion?
Okay, so that brings us to a question of a deep morality issue here. So you have kind of 2 camps here. You have Buffy's camp, who is Buffy's deontological objectivist perspectives on I'm not sure if objectivist actually is the right word there, on morality, which is that a good outcome come to by doing wrong is in itself wrong. And I think you have in the other camp, Giles and Wood kind of suggesting that they're kind of the same mind, but realistically they're not. Giles, while having feeling deep negativity towards Spike for many reasons, is primarily motivated by his moral perspective, which is a utilitarian kind of perspective, and a consequentialist perspective, where he thinks that the outcome here is that Spike can't be here. He's too dangerous, and he is willing to have Spike killed on that basis, even though Spike is insouled. And it's like the show does a really great job of like communicating kind of like this kind of deeply like difficult question of ethics of like, should you do, it is like, you know, it's the candy and trolley problem. Through pressing the lever to divert the train and therefore killing fewer people, but you have now killed someone and therefore done a wrong thing, is that worth the saved deaths, etc.
And then the question adds to that, kind of, by how close are they right, and how close is one to the decision in terms of making, does that influence it? Because one of the classic, obviously, problematizations of the trolley problem is, it's one thing to pull a lever and redirect the trolley and kill a person, but what if you had to push the person in front of the trolley? In theory, it's the same economy of action and the same change, but it's more direct. And I think what really comes into this conversation from a question of moral right, or even pragmatic right, is how close all three of the actors in this are to the Spike.
Subject.
Yeah. Spike is not a random vampire who has a relevance. Like they all bring personal relationship to it.
100%. And I think it's a great, like, you know, it's a great one to draw lines along, in the sense that I think Wood is really problematized and really made interesting in this episode for the first time. I think before this episode he comes across a little flat. In this episode he very clearly has no control over himself in this setting, and he is driven purely by vengeance and trauma. I think Buffy's absolute faith in her own rightness and her ability to do what is right and determine what is right is shown here, in a way that's sometimes headstrong but is deeply good. Like, she is trying to do good at all times. And Giles's like complexity of his character, which is that he will do stuff that Buffy won't do, which is a fascinating and wonderfully written aspect of his character, and a great element of the show, is really on show here. You know, it's and we'll get into this in a bit, but it's the same Giles who killed Ben at the end of season 5 who is doing this stuff. And it's a fascinating question. Who's right, Buffy, realistically, in the setting? You know, we know that, like, I mean, like, it's funny because we know through communication of the show, and not, this isn't necessarily information that the people have in the universe, but that Buffy's commitment to things that have souls need protection, you know, is a communication about personhood and stuff and individuality. And Buffy's commitment to protecting Spike is on that basis, and for a good reason on that basis.
Yeah, no, I absolutely see that. What I think is interesting in terms of what adds to that conversation is how things progress in this episode. I thought particularly interesting was her saying that today, now that she is engaged in this war, and it's a war of scale, that if it came to it and she had to sacrifice Dong, she thinks she would do it this time.
Yeah.
And how not necessarily for the better, or not necessarily for the most cohesive, but like what has happened has materially changed her. Obviously going to heaven and coming back and all that suffering. And I think what happened between season 6 and 7 is, I think she gets there in the end, but what she came back from heaven with was a loss of a sense of a clear right and wrong, or a clear good and evil. And maybe more of between what happened with Willow and all that kind of stuff, more of a sense of she can never fully commit to the grey areas, and she shouldn't. That's not the mission, but I think she understands it more. Yeah,
which is a more, like, I mean, a more adult perspective of, like, you know, absolutes aren't useful.
Yeah. And what I thought was really interesting in that was, you know, they all, both Robin and Giles, rail against her for assuming assuming that her choices are motivated by a naivete and are motivated by a
personal connection.
A personal connection. And at the end, when Buffy says, if Spike tries to kill you, I'll let him, because he is more important than you in this fight, because he is the strongest fighter we have.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really interesting, that it would be one thing for her to say, this right, it's the wrong thing to do to kill a person, etc., because of this. But she is almost saying, I don't need to explain my decisions to Giles or to Robin. I don't need to convince them. But her reasoning was actually quite right. Like, she was right on points as well. You know, he is more valuable than he is a risk.
Yeah, and it's funny because I think what that communicates is that this kind of utilitarian perspective of doing a wrong to ultimately have a right come out of it is so often flawed, you know. It's very much the road to hell is paved with good intentions kind of perspective, where and that is absolutely what the show is trying to communicate in general, is that Giles here has clouded his judgment, thinking that, oh, I should do a wrong thing to get a good outcome here, and he hasn't waited long enough to look at what that wrong thing actually implies and what's involved in it. And I think there's an element here where he is motivated by his own deeply skewed sense of morality, but also his own experience with, like, you know, I think Jenny Calendar is very much in his mind in this episode. And, like, you know, this whole conversation obviously started with Angel, the character, and it continues on through Spike. What I liked, though, as well, is that as an episode, it very much is post the Spike confusion, you know. This episode is able to do what it does because the Spike stuff has been put to bed, and it very much is an enjoyable, legible perspective on Spike here that Buffy has around soulness and goodness and stuff. And that's just useful, I think. I
thought it was interesting where Giles tries to make the point about, Angel left because he saw that his personal connection to you was a liability. It's like, Angel's not that smart. Like, he did do all these things, and he does act well, but as we've seen on Angel, he's equally just a problematic is not the word I'm looking for, but a complicated, fallible thing. And I think
ultimately, like, you know, while you might get a soul, like, you know, plenty of people who are bad and make mistakes have souls. Like, I mean, you see that in Angel season 3, where he is like, just like, you know, I'm a bad boy.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah. And I think it's interesting that really one of the things here is, particularly when Giles is taking Buffy back to the basics of training, obviously distracting her, but kind of talking about it, is not necessarily that he has actually rung out of anything he can teach her as a person, but that there are some things that she can teach him that he doesn't know, and he hasn't had cause to experience because there hasn't been a situation like this. There hasn't been a Slayer like Buffy before. I felt very aware of the fact that I can imagine whatever the Watchers are trained, or what the Watchers are prepared to train Slayers in, it only goes up to a certain grade because they don't survive long enough to go into general tactics and militarization or
adult Slayers aren't supposed to exist realistically.
Yeah. So I thought that was interesting as well, and I think that the choices that are made there, particularly in the way that we'll talk about a little bit about Spike's kind of development in the episode, but they're not the easy answers for the character. Like, it's one thing for Buffy to fall out with Giles. I understand why that happens, but her being willing to sacrifice Robin, like, explicitly, and not out of frustration or pique, but just like a real coolness of kind of like, I will do this if necessary. And also the fact that Spike doesn't accept the guilt that Robin is putting on him and doesn't really apologize, you know, or feel that he needs to, is like an interesting. I feel like this episode, it gave a certain amount of agency back to Buffy and Spike as people who aren't just buffeted by the winds of plot. They kind of, they don't have to go the direction that the emotions of the scene are telling them to go, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. I think ultimately, like, the last thing I'll say about on this note is that the line that she says that, like, to Robin, that the person who you're trying to seek vengeance against, that man no longer exists. It's an interesting one, and it's an intriguing line for the show, and it's a good line to draw in the sand on this character, and I think this is the final note about this. That's very intriguing. I think then one of the other things we need to talk about is the portrayal of Nikki Wood and the issue of just Slayers because in this episode, like the thing that both Nikki and Buffy say to Wood is the mission is what matters. And there's an element here where when Spike has regained his sense, he realizes that his mother, as a vampire, was not speaking the truth, that she did love him as a human, that she didn't want to fuck him. And that was a relief, I think, to him. But she loved him. And he's saying to hurt Wood, he says, your mother didn't love you. If she did, she would have left the thing. And of course, that's not the straightforward answer here. Buffy is experiencing the same journey as Nikki Wood did there, and Nikki Wood's journey was cut short, but what Buffy needs to do is become an adult and gain her own life apart from Slayerhood, essentially. And very much represented through Dawn's addition to the show. And I think everything that Buffy fights for in the later seasons in terms of trying to gain independence and a life is on the basis of Dawn's selfhood and trying to give to Dawn what she hasn't had herself. And in this episode where Buffy is saying the mission is what matters, that's another fake out in terms of the solution. The mission is not what matters. You know, the mission is a deeply patriarchal curse that has been put on her and Nikki Wood, and that they have to shake off, which they do. Yeah,
and what's true is it's a burden that she can't share. And I think Spike says something in this episode about how no matter how many people are around them, that they're always alone, and that isn't true. But you know,
it is true until the last minute of the season, where Buffy no longer is alone for the first time.
Yeah, and that's kind of what it's building towards. You know, but she has to go through these conflicts and these tests of that to really forge, I think, into that. And I think that in terms of, you know, there's often this thing that Giles says, and a lot of people say about how Spike gets the pass, and that's not really how it actually plays out, because what Anya is mildly bitter over is the fact that she was willing to kill Anya, right? But anything that Spike could be killed for is not the Spike we have in front of us now. If we believe the doctrine of the soul, that those are different people, then that he's not responsible for that. Arguably he's not responsible, has diminished responsibility for attacking Buffy, but he, as much as within the vernacular the show can do, he takes responsibility for that, acts on it, etc.
It's so much easier with Angel, because you can just say Angelus and Angel. You can't really say like you know, I'd like to be able to be like, oh, here's Spy, and you know, Spy is nice but Spike is mean.
William. But also what Anya did, she was fully cognizant for those choices, and she is responsible for them. So
and we know that because she takes it back.
Yeah, exactly. And like even the stuff with, you know, Willow, this like the reason, like, Buffy doesn't, her first choice isn't always to kill people. She will do it if it's necessary, but she shouldn't kill Willow just because Willow, you know, went on a rampage. She should try with everyone to try to redeem them. And the thing with Anya, she wasn't able to do that, or didn't seem likely in the moment. With Spike, she has every reason to think that it can be done,
and that it's been done already,
and that has been done, and he's 100% not responsible for what is happening when he's being explicitly brainwashed.
By
the oldest,
the original evil. So that brings us into the kind of, I suppose, the last meaty point we'll talk about for the episode, which is that, like, what are the lies?
What are the lies? Always a great question. What the titles actually mean.
But there are three very clear parent figures here.
So if we're looking at Nikki, is it potentially that the mission is what matters?
Yeah, I think it's the mission is what matters, and and that's very interesting, because it, like, you know, those words are then put in Buffy's mouth, and if we're saying, oh, that's wrong, it's a very interesting one. I think what's interesting about that lie that Nikki tells him, and that, you know, it's. I think the ultimate thing there is, like, you know, part of the show is trying to, like, I mean, it kind of feels like what it's trying to communicate is that she lied when she said that she's working for him because she is ultimately more interested in the mission, you know, that, I was going to say principle, that Robin is less important to her than being a Slayer. I think if that's what the show is saying, that's kind of a shitty thing to say, especially, like, about how it reflects on working mothers, you know? I think what's more accurate is that the lie she's telling there is that, or it's being highlighted, like what she's saying there, and how it connects to Buffy is that it's a lie on the basis of it's not true, because there are other options here. And I think it's important as well to highlight that like Nikki didn't have the opportunity to dispel that lie herself or to free herself from it.
And I think what we need to acknowledge Nikki for is that she is a prototype of the idea of going outside really of the Slayer bounds, and by looking for connection, I don't think it's ever clarified who Robin's father is.
I don't think so either.
I think the vibe I get is potentially the Watcher.
Oh, that's interesting.
It could be, but even maybe I'm picking it up from somewhere else in extra canon, but maybe it's not that. But obviously, he was raised by his Watcher, by her Watcher. But she doesn't fully get out, but she does choose to have her son and to keep her son with her and to have a life that is not just about being a Slayer. She doesn't have the network that Buffy is lucky to have, but she does have a connection with her Watcher, which is caring, obviously, and the Watcher raises the son. So she, through a lot of the trauma that is wrapped up in the whole Nikki stuff, she does kind of set that in motion, I feel.
Yeah. Then I'd say the second lie, obviously, is Giles' lie, who, what he's... It's funny because, like, all three of the lies at the core are... None of them are intended meanly or
they're
badly.
untruths repeated as opposed to deceptions.
Yeah. So, the lie that Giles tells her is that, like, this has to be done, that Spike has to be killed, and he lies to her about, like, what he's doing, and it misleads her into coming with him. There was the deleted scene from this episode, which I believe, and I'm not 100% certain on this, was removed from the episode right before airing or soon before airing. So apparently it was shot. And the interaction is, I'll read it out here. So it's, Giles says, yes, and the first seems to be exploiting it to his advantage. And she says, yeah, exactly. The first doing this, Spike is innocent. Giles says, so was Ben. And then Buffy says, Ben? Giles says, he was a human being after all, forced his whole life to share his mortal form with a demigod from a hell dimension. Buffy responds, glory, I know. What does that have to do? And then Giles says, Ben was oblivious to the atrocities Glory committed, no more responsible for her crimes than Spike is to his when triggered. Glory was invincible, impossible to kill. Ben was not. So after you defeated her, after you left Ben lying there alive, I made a decision, one that you couldn't. Buffy says, Giles. And Giles says, I put my hand over his mouth, and as he struggled weakly, I smothered him because it had to be done. He was a liability. And then Buffy responds, oh God, you've been stalling me, keeping me away. Really intriguing for a lot of reasons. I think it's slightly badly written. So I'm glad it got removed. It's an interesting coda or close to the whole thing. It's also slightly odd in the sense that Ben, towards the end of season 5, does do some pretty heinous things, especially around Dawn, though it is not stuff that he that the Scoobies are aware of.
Yeah, and that's what necessarily he needs to be murdered for.
Yeah. It's a very interesting one, and it really does communicate why, what Giles is about here and why he's doing these things. And
like the misapprehension he's made, the progression, and this is the point he learns it, is he doesn't need to make the choices that he feels she can't make anymore, because she can make more choices because she's grown. Yeah. Arguably within the text, he did have to make that. She could never have made that choice with Ben, and that was something that arguably needed to be done. Yeah. But she is not the same Slayer she was when she jumped from that tower, and this is him, I think, really realizing that. Absolutely.
It's also, I think, important to highlight that Giles has lied to her about just the patriarchal structures of the Slayer lineage. As in, like, not intentionally, but he's repeated this kind of like suggestion that she is like bound to it and has no other option. And he has been part of her oppression. He's been a very large part of the oppression of Buffy, and he realizes that at some point and tries to correct it. But he has been part of that. It's a really intriguing deleted scene. Obviously, it's not text, so that's important to bear in mind. But I think it's very interesting. And then obviously the third lie is between Spike and his mother. So in the flashbacks, you see Spike really doting on his mother, reading her poetry and being very, very committed to her in a slightly sexual way. No, it's in a mother-son relationship.
In the simplest terms, a very Freudian way.
Very Freudian way. He's a simple boy. And then when Drusilla sires Spike, his first reaction is, oh, I'll get my mom to be a vampire too, so then she won't die and she'll be with me forever. And when he does this, the vampire brain in his mother completely clicks, and she turns into someone who hates Spike, who suggests that Spike is only interested in fucking her, and that she has no interest in him, and he's disgusting to her. And he's been trying to crawl back into her from the moment he escaped.
Doing that thing that vampires do, which is taking the good and corrupting it into 100%. Its most hurtful form. Yeah.
And Spike has a realization upon Robin Wood beating the shit out of him that this was a lie, that his mother was lying to him because she was a vampire, she was influenced by that, and that he's been holding on to that for so long. It's part of why the trigger was working on him. And freed from that, he's freed from the trigger, and he realizes that, like, of course his mother loved him, and that's a so it's an odd one where the lies here are like very of Buffy, very grey and very, in lots of ways, well intended, or have odd, like, not awfulness behind them, though they're all deeply damaging. Yeah,
they're not manipulating for necessary. They're all statements which are not manipulating for the liar, so to speak, self-interest.
Yeah.
Everyone's fallible in the conversation.
Yeah. The interaction between Spike and his mother, deeply uncomfortable. Did not like that. It was well written, but it was deeply uncomfortable.
Yeah, it was uncomfortable as it was intended to be, and I think it really portrays, like, yes. I think with both Liam and William, also I never really thought about the fact that they have the same name. I think
I've spoken about it
we mentioned it before, but as I say it, it's like, okay, grand.
There's also Billy, who's Buffy's other love interest.
I think when we see their human forms, there's actually quite a good character development that, Spike is the way he is because that is who he was when he was alive, and similarly Angel's like daddy issues and aggression and all that kind of stuff. Oh, speaking of, on one of the things I said I wanted to mention when I talked about the comic books was a absolute bonkers panel, which I'll have to tweet out from one of the more recent Spike and Angel comics, where in the course of a fight, Spike makes some reference to hanging out in a sauna, and Angel's like, what are you talking about? And Spike says, don't judge, leather daddies have a very welcoming community, and stuff along those lines. It's like, why is this necessary?
Awful.
To introduce this.
As if Angel doesn't already know that.
Yeah. But yeah, I think they really do express their personalities well. They're consistent as vampires. And actually what I thought was a really interesting utility of seeing setting was that Drusilla is in this episode, Juliet Lando, recurring guest character or guest appearances, but only in the scenes that she needs to be in. She's not there for the final confrontation with the mother, because it's not really about the whirlwind. It's more about setting up Spike having to make this choice, and really showing that from the start, even though he is corrupted by his being a vampire, there's an element of humanity to him still, even so.
Okay, let's move into the dusting, shall we?
Yeah, Alex.
All right, I have a bunch of Buffy bits for you. So have you read this? Spike's mother's physician, because she seems to have TV, they refer to him as Dr. Gull. William Gull was a physician to the royal family and often believed to be Jack the Ripper.
I have heard that before, yeah.
This is the final appearance of Juliet Lando in Buffy, though she does appear in Angel in flashbacks. The mother stuff, siring his mother and being siring his sickly mother, and her disliking him, apparently very, very similar to the plot of Interview with the Vampire with Lestat, which is interesting because Anne Rice died this week, which is a real shame. Real contribution to the vampire stuff. Not my cup of tea by any stretch of the imagination, and had some bad policies when it came to fan fiction, but that's
a beloved writer in the Gothic,
100%, and loved writing gay shit, which we all appreciate. So the actor of Anne, who is Spike's mother, her name is Anne, which I think they don't actually say in the episode itself, but I think it's a very clear connection to Buffy. Her actress, Caroline Lagerfeld, is chosen here because of her visual similarity to Sarah Michelle Gellar, apparently. And obviously her middle name is Buffy's middle name. Her name is Buffy's middle name. The original title of the episode was Mother and Sons, or I think just Mother and Son. But Drew Goddard pointed out that Buffy's separating from a father figure in the episode. So that's why it became parents writ large. And then the second last thing I'd say is that this is the final episode where Buffy stakes a regular vampire.
Weird.
It doesn't happen again. She kills some uber vamps, obviously, but yeah, this is the final one, and I think that's very notable. You know, she's doing it with Giles as a return to this, and then like saying goodbye to that whole era of her life, really.
Mm-hmm.
And the last thing I'll say is when William says to his mother, "You're glowing," that's a clear callback to when in the previous episode, I think Fool for Love, where Spike is kind of like writing poetry for Cecily, he tries to find a word, a synonym for it, and comes up with effulgent, which is obviously shit, and glowing is a better one. Do you have any Buffy bits for me there, Joe?
Yeah, so I thought it was interesting seeing the flashbacks to the 70s and 77, seeing Spike's jacket that he's wearing at the time, and it's kind of like proto Spike version, and just the idea of her bringing Robin along on the patrols as well was interesting for them having kind of a dynamic there. I enjoy Giles making reference to his backup library that he has in England that he could have shipped over, and Robin trying to figure out Spike's convoluted backstory, being like, okay, so he has a trigger, a soul, and a chip. The whole thing about the stone that got turned into a bug that climbed into his brain was like fine. It was
visuals of it were grand.
Yeah, it was just like such a weird little interesting idea to be inserted.
We both quite enjoyed Andrew taking the phone call from Fred and saying a very effeminate man phoned.
Yeah, and seeming intrigued by this.
And also corpsing a little bit.
And particularly Drew's line that I'm the other who gave birth to your song. Really layering it on thick.
Yeah, seriously, the mommy issues and the Oedipal issues in this episode are extensive. Here's some fashion notes for you though, Joel. What do you think my fashion note's going to be here?
Is it going to be Robin taking his shirt off?
That was great. No, Giles at the beginning of the episode is wearing the nicest piece of clothing I've seen on this entire show.
Oh yeah,
it is a lovely dark shearling jacket. It's kind of a bit too big. It's a grey, browny kind of grey, with like lovely shearling lining. Beautiful, gorgeous, incredible. By far my favorite outfit of the entire show, I would say. The Buffy's wearing just like a black turtleneck, which is nice but reasonably plain. I really hate how William dresses generally. He always, especially when he's a
thirsty wig,
is incredibly thirsty wig, especially when he's post being a human. He tends to like wear his like waistcoat undone and his shirt collars are like splayed like his own legs with those leather daddies. It's just awful. I hate it. Anya's polka dot top and her awful pink hat are truly awful. I fucking hated them. And she only appears for a couple of shots, and I was just like, why did they put her in this?
We still have Rowan in those dungarees as well that I think are looking increasingly childish for a reason.
Wood looks incredible wearing his olive tank top. Just like, I mean, the man is like gripped.
And he has like power gloves. That was
cool.
Spike, yeah,
bizarre but really cool.
Can I say I loved the idea of him bringing him into this like crucifix lying room and then taking time to pull up his trigger on iTunes and
that was
play
great.
it.
Yeah. And then my final fashion note would be that Giles' brown winter coat in the graveyard is also really nice. He's wearing a nice green like cable knit jumper underneath, and Giles looked great in this episode. At the beginning of the episode, where he takes off his glasses when he's talking to Wood and Buffy at one point, he looks like a man in his like late 30s. And he was not in his late 30s at this episode point. Do you have any passion notes there, Joe?
No, I think that covers off everything. I like, as I said, I liked how Spike dressed in the past. Obviously, Nikki's style, the whole 70s vibe there, is fantastic. And yeah, I think I continue to think that Buffy manages to vary her patrol outfit while still looking very chic. So I enjoyed that as well.
Okay, do you have a death count for me, Joe?
Yeah, so we have two vampires staked by Spike during the kind of the group confrontation. And we have Ang, Pratt. Did we ever establish that in Kang that
bloody, bloody, and bloody?
So yeah, Ang Pratt, sired and dusted by Spike in flashback, and then Richard, who is the newborn vamp that Buffy wails on for an incredibly long period of time, dusted by Buffy perfunctorily at the end. Okay,
great. And Joel, do you have an episode, or do you have a rating for me?
Yeah, I think I would give this episode 9.4 implied mogums.
Yeah, tell me about that.
Yeah, I think it's so crucial to the character development of like all four characters who are tied to it. I think it required great performances all around, and I think it had very little else. It required very little else in the episode, just the examination of like who these people are to each other and the choices that they make. And I think by having an episode like this here, it requires you to do less work in the end game of the season, because that is there. The motivation, the characterization is there. So I think it's really valuable in that sense as well.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm going to give us episode 9.1 effeminate Freds out of 10. It's just like, while this season often suffers from being too spread thin and having too many characters to cover and too many directions to be looking at, this really narrowcasts on these four characters, and it does a great job of it. And I find it really intriguing. I find it well written, taught, well acted, visually intriguing. The flashbacks were some of the least annoying flashbacks of any Buffy episode. So yeah, I thought it was really, really good. I really liked it. Okay, should we move into the Cordelia Chase?
Yes.
If we have to.
We're at a nadir.
Yeah.
This
episode's so fucking shit.
Episode is Inside Out. And this is the culmination of the basically the part of the season where the big bad gets properly introduced, and we kind of move into the final fight for a few episodes. And the general thing being that they corner Cordelia as / the Beastmaster. Conger gets involved, escapes with her. There is a lot of trying to track down on a very compressed period of time, figuring out who Cordelia is, what happened, why she did this. They go and drag Skip, who's the demon who had been guiding her on her her ascension, essentially, to a higher power. Drag him into a device to trap him and get some information out of him. And then on the other side, we have Cordelia about to give birth to this demon creature. Conger kidnapping a girl to sacrifice for this, and kind of the battle for Conger's soul, or to prevent the second coming of this evil thing or whatever. This is a terrible, terrible, terrible episode.
Yeah.
And not because it's boring as such or
Plenty happens.
Plenty happens in it. This is the episode which everything I suppose has been building towards in many ways for this arc. All the weight of exposition is on this episode.
And exposition it does.
Yeah.
And every moment is dripping with exposition.
If you give this episode the control it wants to have over Angel, it actually ruins a lot of things about the show. So there are entire scenes which are people standing around, explaining things to each other, making guesses, making huge suppositions, which turn out to be true because that's what the writers know the answer is, but really drawing some connections between, so Cordelia must have done this and this, and we actually see like these tawdry flashbacks where we see this is what Jasmine as Cordelia was doing in this episode earlier in the season.
She was naked.
Including, there's an episode where Cordelia killed one of the Ratet to block out the song, and they're like, how could she do that without getting blood on her clothes? And then we cut back and they're like Lizzie Borden, she was naked, and we see Cordelia naked hacking up the guy. So there's all of that random pulling together, like fan fiction. I would almost say, except that a lot of fan fiction is very well written. So I think it's
in a really awful way. Like, they basically say everything that's happened in this show so far: Angel being brought back from death, Cordelia being brought down from ascension, Cordelia ascending. Everything is because of Jasmine. Yeah,
this is exactly it. If you take it at face value, this episode tries to stolen valor. It tries to take responsibility for a lot of otherwise good plot that's happening over the course of both Angel and Buffy.
Good development of characters specifically.
Yeah, it goes so far as to suggest that the reason why Angel, which has never been explained otherwise, came back from hell in Buffy was that Jasmine was the power that sent him back essentially. So it's terrible. The interactions are so weak in that.
Yeah.
And because of that,
Gunn and Fred continue to be here for some reason.
And Cordelia is trying to actually bring forth the demon. Like, a lot of the magic ritual stuff she's doing is so inconsequential. Like, why is she doing this? Why is she doing that? But so arch, like camp villain kind of Power Ranger villain kind of stuff.
It's important to bear in mind that, like, Jasmine gets defeated in a couple episodes' time. Not very difficultly.
Yeah.
It doesn't take... They don't sacrifice
There's
any
no
of their...
glory-like combat with her.
Yeah, and there's no... They don't sacrifice any, like, of their fellows to it. She just loses. So it's all for naught.
Yeah. So I do think that this this thing of trying to suggest that she's orchestrated the entire plot of basically Buffy and Angel to a large degree is...
Shitty writing.
Really shitty writing. Really... poorly communicated. Also, I think it's really weird that she is also a deific threat, and yet they do no effort to see if it's connected to the first. Now, I know they're different shows, but like there's a certain stretch of logic there, I think, as well. And what else didn't I like? And yeah, at the end, so Jasmine comes through as Angel decides to kill Cordelia, and then they're all subjugated before Gina Torres, who is introduced.
And Angel is like, she's beautiful.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh god.
So yeah, a lot of bad things about it.
And the next episode is all of them like fawning over her, right?
The next couple of episodes are basically a utopian nightmare where they all love her but they have no free will, and then they have to find a way to break free of that, essentially. So there's only two things in this episode that are interesting. One is Skip is always an enjoyable...
I find him not enjoyable in this, but go on. Is
often enjoyable, except this is probably where he falls down. I still find him funny to some degree, but what I didn't like specifically was now I suppose in universe you can say whether this is true or not, but saying, oh yeah, no, I'm sure that the reason why Cordelia was chosen was because she was so perfect and great to be a saint, etc. And it really makes it feel like that journey she went through, where Cordelia and Charisma did have to act and go through this, like choosing to take on this responsibility because she wants to be part of the fight.
And because she took on like so much like awfulness unto herself, she took on divisions, she took on so much pain.
It really makes it sound kind of pointless. And then the other thing was there is a quite unexpected interaction where you have, I think probably the last appearance of Darla. I have to double check that, but she comes back in what is ostensibly an actual ghost or an actual genuinely Darla, a vision to Connor, who she's never met, obviously.
And sold Darla
to try and convince him to not make this choice. And you have
I would suggest it's probably a fragment of his own. I mean, like, given that he has her soul, their souls are very intertwined. I would say it's a fragment of her existence continuing on within him,
rather than coming back from somewhere else. Exactly. Yeah, it's not the show presents ghosts, but it's not. He's not being deceived.
No.
And you have Darla in white and Jasmine as Cordelia in black, and these two opposing powers pulling on him. And eventually, in quite a scary kind of turn, Jasmine can then see Darla and like manages to like convince Connor to make the wrong choice. She performs it well, and I think Julie Benz always puts like a lot of heart into it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of all I'll say about it. This is probably the nadir for me of Angel, insofar as
I think there's more. I think the next couple episodes are going to be trash as well.
They might be trash episodes, but if this episode is the one that brings the idea that Jasmine has orchestrated everything. And, so I would give this 2 failed feminist gestures.
I was going to say 3 failed feminist gestures, but like in that kind of like below sub 4, it's just like it's all bad. It's all just shit. Maybe the worst episode of Buffy or Angel.
Yeah, potentially. Not a good time,
no.
But I enjoyed watching it with you, Brian.
Thanks. I just played my Switch.
So that's everything, I think, for this week.
Yep.
So thanks very much as always for joining us. We will see you, as Brian said, next week for our last episode of this calendar year of the winter. If you enjoyed this episode, please let us know.
Tell us what your Christmas plans are.
Yeah, tell your friends. Tell us your Christmas plans.
Tell us what you're going to be watching over Christmas. That's what we really want to know.
Tell your parents.
Yeah.
Tell your parents about Buffy Boys over Christmas.
Tell your non-binary drag queens about Buffy Boys, because someone already did.
Oh, very true. Yeah, we did very kind but a super fan did recommend us to Bimini Bambulash, who is
by far
iconic,
by far the greatest drag queen to have come out of Drag Race UK.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Which is lovely. And on that note, we'll leave you. Take care, and we will see you next time on Buffy Boys.
Buffy Boys. Boy.